What's up? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video we're talking about the Polar Vantage M2. Before we get started, a couple of disclosures. Polar was good enough to send me this Vantage M2 for the purpose of review. However, there are no expectations and I'm just going to be giving you my opinion. So let's get into it. I've been wearing the Polar Vantage M2 for about a month. I have run it through its paces. It has been my daily watch. As far as comparison goes, I have been comparing it to the Polar Vantage V2. This is Polar's flagship watch, and a little later in the video I'm going to be going over the differences between the M2 and the V2. Let's get started with price. The Vantage M2 is about $300. $299.95. And before I even go any further, tell you about the features, tell you about the watch, that is an incredible deal. If you are just getting into running, maybe you're buying your first specific running watch, this could be the watch for you. For $299.95, you are getting a full-featured multi-sport watch. Now, Polar has redone a lot of their lineup over the last year. We've seen the Vantage V2, the Grit X. You may remember my review a couple weeks ago of the Ignite 2. This is Polar's newest smart/fitness watch. But if you want a watch primarily for running, for triathlon, for biking, for swimming, for everything else, the Vantage M2 fits the bill. Let me tell you why. I am not going to be comparing stats as far as GPS accuracy, heart rate monitor accuracy, because I've been comparing it with the Vantage V2 and the differences have been negligible. Like when I've been taking this out for a run, they are pretty much the same. Now they're always a couple hundredths of a mile off, but it's so close. It is not even worth going into it. Polar is one of the top makers of sports and GPS watches on the market, so you can rest assured that the data that comes from this watch, the distance, the heart rate, is going to be accurate. Now with that said, wrist-based heart rate monitors are notoriously finicky. In my testing period over the last month, I haven't had any peaks or valleys where my average is, you can see it going along and then suddenly it peaks to max heart rate or it just drops out. That's pretty normal with wrist-based heart rate monitors, and I haven't had that in the last month of testing this watch. I think this thing looks absolutely fantastic. Now, the Vantage M2 does come in 4 colors. I have gray and yellow. It's gray on the front, yellow on the back, and the yellow kind of comes through the holes of the strap. It is really quite lovely. It looks good on my wrist. I like wearing it. It has a 46mm diameter across the screen and it weighs 45.5 grams. It's not a big watch, not a small watch, especially when you consider it to some of those really big sport watches out there. It does have a plastic case with a heart rate monitor on the back, and while it doesn't look cheap, when you go up to the next level, the Vantage V2, we do have an aluminium case on the back of the watch. It does have a lovely beveled bezel with some etching around the sides. It just looks really sharp, and this is a good thing. The watch does lie flat, so when you lay it down and you're not using it, it just lies flat. I think Polar made a good decision with having the lie flat strap, because the Vantage V2 that was released late last year doesn't. You kind of have to lay it on its side, or you kind of have to lay it like that. Just not pretty. The Vantage M2 has a 22mm removable band, and it's a universal band. So you could buy as many straps as you want for cheap from Amazon and replace it with this. The Vantage V2 does have replaceable straps, but they're proprietary, so you have to buy them from Polar. Now, like all smartwatches that you are going to buy from like several years ago onward into the future, it does have smart features. When it's connected to your phone, you can control your music from the watch. There is no onboard storage, so you do have to have your phone with you if you want to control the music and listen to something. But from the watch, you can skip a track, back a track, you can change the volume. It's pretty handy to have this when your phone is tucked away. It does have a pretty solid weather app on here, which as well as giving you an hourly forecast moving forward, it also gives you the wind speed, the wind direction, the humidity, the temperature. It's got all the information that you want. And if you've been watching this channel for a while, you know I'm a fan of telling you guys about the weather. This watch helps. You can get push notifications sent to the watch. So whatever notifications you have turned on your phone, they will come through to the watch. However, and this is a big however, the push notifications are not enabled when you're in an activity. So if you're out for a run, your phone is tucked away in a pack and you're running, you're not going to know what's going on. Someone's trying to reach you, that notification is not going to come to your watch. Maybe that's an oversight, maybe it's on purpose, I don't know. Either way, I know that when I'm running, I do want notifications to come to my watch. I don't want to have to pull my phone out and check. Now, if you've had a Polar watch recently in the last year, you're going to be very familiar with the UI. The Vantage M2 is no different from the other Polar watches, and I like it. It's very simple, but it is very intuitive. You can minorly change how the watch face looks. You can change it from analog to digital. You can make the seconds bigger, the minutes bigger, and you can also choose from several different watch faces. Now, the watch faces are kind of like widgets. and you can choose which widgets you want to have active in the settings menu. I know this all sounds a bit confusing, but let me just explain. So let's say I wanted to have the weather as a watch face, I wanted to have my weekly activity as a watch face, I wanted to have music controls as a watch face. I could set that and have it on. Then when I want to switch between the different watch faces, I just use the up button and scroll through them. Now the time is always left in the middle, but you have the different widgets. Don't know if I'm really explaining this very well, but there's also your current heart rate widget. That's the one I like to keep it on because I like to be able to see my current heart rate whenever I look at the time. Okay, maybe this will all make a little more sense as we go through this in a little bit. Let's talk about battery life for just a second, because that's a big deal. No one wants to have to charge this watch every single day. That is just crazy. Apple Watch users, you know what I'm talking about. The Polar Vantage M2 does last for 30 hours in training mode. That is with GPS on and the heart rate monitor going all the time. But you can extend it up to 100 hours of GPS time if you change the ping rate of the GPS satellites to 2 minutes. If you just want to use it as a watch, the battery will last for 5 days. Now, I haven't wore it down to 5 days, but just extrapolating out from what I've been using it for, with all the notifications, maybe running an hour a day, I think it probably would last for 5 days, but I would be getting pretty anxious on that last day, just because, you know, when the battery level gets down below 20%, you start sweating, you want to throw it on the charger. I've been coming home from my runs and throwing it on the charger. By the time I get out of the shower, the watch is fully charged. As far as the heart rate monitor goes, Polar is using the same heart rate monitor, the same configuration of LED lights in the Vantage M2 as they are in the Ignite 2. And that is 5 green LEDs and 4 red LEDs. Polar likes to call this the Precision Prime Sensor Fusion technology, not to be confused with the Precision Prime 2.0, which is found in the Vantage V2. However, I'm not going to dig into this again, but if you saw my video on the Ignite 2, I found that the Precision Prime Sensor Fusion technology beats the Precision Prime 2.0 found in the V2. In the month that I've been wearing the Vantage M2, I haven't had any spikes or drops, which is actually pretty impressive because I've used it every single day. Can't talk about Polar without talking about the app. The app is absolutely fantastic. There are 130 sport modes, which you can choose which ones you want to add to the watch. The Vantage M2 does have FuelWise. And FuelWise is basically reminders for you to fuel wisely. It'll give you a reminder to fuel and to drink during your events. Now, while you can set it to remind you at regular intervals, so let's say every half an hour I want to take a gel, you can also set it for the watch to just use its brain to remind you based on your energy consumption. That's pretty good. That takes all the work out of it. And the watch does that based on past efforts. So it takes all the data that you've already put into it from all your runs, from all your workouts. It works out how much energy you've used, and then it will tell you how much you need to take in order to fuel your workout the most efficiently. At the end of every workout, it does give you a nutrition breakdown. I don't know if that's the right way of explaining it to you, but it does tell you how much protein you used on that workout, how much fat you used, and how many carbs you used. This is nothing new for sports watches, running watches, but it does have a race pace virtual partner. You can set it at the pace you want to run a certain race, and it'll be there on your watch, reminding you constantly that you are falling behind, or that you're running too fast, faster than your goal, but more likely for me, falling behind. One of the features I love the most about Polar watches is FitSpark. FitSpark is absolutely fantastic, and it takes all the guesswork out of your workouts. Basically, it breaks it down into like 3 areas. We have cardio, strength work, and then supportive, which is kind of like stretching and that kind of thing. The watch knows what you've been doing, and then it tells you to do something else from one of the other areas and reminds you how to do it. But it doesn't just remind you to do it. It gives you specific timed workouts and gives you the workouts that you have to do. It's incredibly handy if you're ever left wondering, like, what should I do now to further my goals? Speaking of goals, using the Polar app and the Polar Flow website, you can download training plans onto the watch. And you can pretty much choose whatever you want. I think it's 5K, 10K, half marathon and marathon, but you choose the amount of time that you've got to train for this event, and then you just send the entire training plan to your watch. So each day, you know what workout you have to do. It really takes the guesswork out of training. I'm kind of a data nerd, and the Polar gives me what I want, especially when it comes to sleep. I want to know all about my sleep, because I sleep through most of it. The Vantage M2 has Sleep Plus stages. So obviously you're wearing this watch all the time, you want it to read your heart rate constantly, and when you wear it, it will break down your sleep into the different stages and then give you a number at the end. That number is what they call a nightly recharge. And it lets you know, based on the heart rate data that you've used throughout the sleep, that tells you how ready you are to tackle your next day's workouts. Like the other Polar watches, the Vantage M2 does feature the serene breathing exercises. Basically, it walks you through a kind of meditation but just breathing, and you get to watch the little bubbles on the screen and feel the vibrations on the watch. Just breathe in and breathe out. It's actually something that I think is rather silly, but at the same time, it's really handy to have. How often would you just sit down and breathe? This kind of reminds you and walks you through a set time that you have to do it for. The Vantage M2 does have a fitness test. Now you may remember that I did a running performance test, kind of like a VO2 max test, using the Polar Vantage V2. The fitness test on the Vantage M2 is not the same. Basically, to do the fitness test on here, you have to sit still for 5 minutes. The watch reads your heart rate, your breathing rate, and then it spits out a number, gives you an estimated VO2 max number. The number that it gave me was actually right around where my VO2 max is, so I'm not entirely sure if it's using all the data that I've put into this watch from all my runs, from all my sessions, or if it's actually getting that number from just sitting there and me breathing and sitting on the sofa for 5 minutes. Either way, let's give it the benefit of the doubt. It did give me an accurate VO2 max number. Okay, I've already said that this is a $300 watch. If you wanted to go up to the next level, a flagship of the Polar line is the Vantage V2. This costs $200 more. This is right around $499.95. So let me tell you a couple of the things that the Vantage V2 has that the Vantage M2 doesn't. The Vantage V2 has a barometric altimeter. Polar M2 does not. That means the Vantage V2 has a hill splitter feature, which breaks down when you're climbing and when you're going downhill, so you know where you have to improve. It's actually a very, very good feature. It's just one that me living in Florida, where I don't have a lot of hills, don't get too much chance to use it. The Vantage V2 does have Recovery Pro, which just takes the recovery metrics that it gives you to the next level. The Vantage V2 does have a running performance test, which I will link up here when I did that, and basically it's your typical VO2 max test. You gradually get faster and faster until you can't run any faster. It has a cycling FTP test. It has a leg recovery test. So let's say you do a big session and you're wondering, should I go out the next day and do it again? The Vantage V2 has a leg recovery test, which basically consists of doing a couple of jumps. See how high you can jump. From that data, the Vantage V2 tells you if you're recovered or not. Strava live segments are in the V2. You can get route navigation on the Vantage V2 using Komoot. The Vantage V2 does measure power. Now that's because it has a barometric altimeter. Power is a metric that I don't generally pay much attention to, but it's good to know that I have it on the V2. The Vantage V2 does have longer battery life and the waterproof specs are more. This can go down to 100 meters. The Vantage M2 is only rated down to 30 meters. Couple more things. The Vantage V2 does have audio alerts. The Vantage M2 is vibration only, which I actually prefer. I don't like any noises coming from my watch. The Vantage M2 is buttons only. The Vantage V2 has buttons and a touchscreen. On the Vantage V2, I use the buttons more than I use the touchscreen. The only time that I have found that the touchscreen works for me is when I'm doing intervals and I want to hit a lap. Now, usually I would just hit the side button on the Vantage M2, but on the V2, because it has a touchscreen, I can just tap it and it logs a lap. Well, my friends, write down in the comments below if you use Polar, if this video has kind of led you to maybe think about using a Polar watch in the future. I'd love to know down in the comments below. Of course, I will link to all the watches that I've talked about down below. New running videos are posted at least twice a week. Be kind, be happy, run well. See you in a couple of days.